To quote the great Jimi Hendrix, knowledge speaks, but wisdom listens. You're listening to The Wisdom Project, a podcast that does just that. We listen.
My name is Doug Boyd, director of the Louis B. Nunn Center for Oral History in the University of Kentucky Libraries. When we look back at the historical record, it's full of stories, primarily stories of the famous. One thing that I love about oral history is that it connects individual stories to the historical record, but you also get stories about people that you may not read about in the textbooks. People who aren't famous, but maybe should be. Now, the story of Jackie Robinson and the desegregation of Major League Baseball in the United States is one of the highest profile stories of mainstream desegregation, certainly playing an important role in efforts to eventually end legal segregation in the United States. Books were written, major movies. This is a story that was pretty well documented. In 1946 and 1947, Jackie Robinson became the first African-American baseball player to play in the major leagues, opening the door for many players. Branch Rickey, the president of the Brooklyn Dodgers, orchestrated Robinson's move from the Negro Leagues to Major League Baseball in 1946, and on April 15, 1947, Robinson officially broke Major League Baseball's color barrier, leading to a pretty incredible career. Now, the commissioner of Major League Baseball at the time was A.B. Chandler, otherwise known as Happy Chandler. Now, Happy Chandler was a former governor of Kentucky, which is why the Nunn Center has one of the best archived oral history collections documenting the story of desegregating Major League Baseball. This oral history collection was created by Bill Marshall, who eventually wrote a tremendous book titled Baseball's Pivotal Era. You should check it out. Marshall interviewed both Negro League players, Major League players. He interviewed journalists, coaches. He also interviewed owners. Now, I began this introduction by talking about the fact that oral history is so effective at connecting us to stories that we may not hear about in the mainstream. Everyone I've mentioned thus far have been mainstream stories. Well, one of the owners that Bill Marshall interviewed for his project was a woman named Effa Manley. She was the co-owner of the Negro League baseball team, the Newark Eagles. Manley co-owned the team with her husband Abe from 1935 until 1948. And according to Major League Baseball, she was the first woman to own and operate a professional baseball team. She was also the first woman to be inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. At a time when both Negro League and Major League Baseball executives were men, Effa Manley was not only good at what she did. She won the World Series in 1946, and, according to the New York Times, she, quote, handled the daily business operations of the team and was considered an expert in marketing and advertising, unquote. By way of her 1977 oral history interview, I'm honored to introduce you to Effa Manley, co-owner of the Newark Eagles.
There were 12 Negro baseball teams operating all over the country, depending entirely on booking agents. And they were magnificent teams. Homestead Grays, Kansas City Moss, Birmingham Black Barons, Chicago American Giants, all great teams that continued to operate until the baseball was finally wrecked. So Abe was interested enough to want to see them organized into leagues. And he got 5 of the teams in the East to go along with him and set up the Negro National League on condition that he would operate a team out of Brooklyn, Ebbets Field, the Dodgers' home park. This Negro National League, that's how it was born. So Abe got these 5 teams to go along with. They each gave him 2 players, and he was able to get the rest of the players together, and that's how the Newark Eagles were born. And we drew so poorly in Brooklyn that year that the next year we moved to Newark. Now, I should have said that's how the Brooklyn Eagles were born. But the next year we moved to Newark, and we stayed there for the rest of the time.
One of the great things about this interview is you got a behind-the-scenes look at the logistics of running a baseball team in the 1930s and 1940s.
It was a constant, you were traveling all the time. Right. Every time I looked, I was on a plane going here or there, went to all the meetings, of course, you know that. Now, in the beginning, the men were a little bit, I believe, disturbed at this woman entering the picture, but not long.
One example of the day-to-day operations that she describes is when she tells a story about having to make a rare trade of a player.
I'll tell you what happened with our Negro baseball. There was no such thing as dissatisfaction on the teams. The boys, honest to God, were not working. They loved it. they were enjoying every minute of their work, you know. And I don't think that there was any such thing as dissatisfaction. Nowadays, these huge salaries and things just with the white leagues, there's so many problems seem to crop up. But in the case of our Negro baseball, now there was one time Abe was going to make a trade for this very Pat Patterson, and the fans found out about it, and the fellow he was going to trade was very popular in Newark, Murray Watkins. And I used to sit down in the stand with the fans most of the time. The best place to see the game is really from the press box, but I most of the time, sat in the stand. And when word got around that Abe was going to trade Watkins, the fans all got on me. They were waiting for me when I get the ball. What's this about Watkins going to be traded, girl? I said, listen, Don, that's not my department. I have absolutely nothing to... Oh, what do you mean? We know you run this team, girl. You do this. And they were just that they couldn't understand me saying I didn't know any, which I didn't. It wasn't my department. The trade was made, and that was this Pat Patterson. I told you, I don't think we'd have won the pennant without him. He was magnificent. He was a physical ed teacher in the wintertime in one of the colleges in Texas. And as soon as Patterson appeared on the scene, these same fans, girl, the trade is okay. Patterson started right in looking like $1 million. He was really something. He was one of those. Yeah. Girl, the trade was good. he was one of those exceptions. He's one of those.
Like a good oral history interviewer, Bill Marshall takes a great story and turns it into his next question.
You mentioned Pat Patterson having a winter job.
Yeah, he taught physical ed at one of the Negro colleges in Texas. Now, which one, I don't remember.
Did other players have other part-time jobs during the season?
Well, now, let me say, that's an interesting thing. You see that little mark up on the wall right beside that picture on the woodwork?
Yes.
A trophy used to stand there. Now, and that's a picture of it down below, which I'll show you. The first year we had the team, 1935, I was very unhappy about the boys not having any work in the winter. So I proceeded to make this contact in Puerto Rico. I didn't know the man personally in Puerto Rico, but I knew someone in New York who knew him well enough to make the contact. And this Puerto Rican setup promised me that if I sent the team down there, they would keep them busy. So I got the fellow who was managing the best Negro team, the Homestead Grays. His name was Vic Harris. And I got Vic to go along with me. And that's a picture there. I'll show you later. That little picture down there in that little bit of a frame, that's a team. Vic got about half of my boys agreed to go. And Vic got the rest of them together. And I let them have my uniform, so they went down as the Brooklyn Eagles. That was the year we played in Brooklyn. So they went down as the Brooklyn Eagles. Puerto Rico accepted them with open arms, put them right in the league. They proceeded to win the pennant, beat everybody in Puerto Rico, brought me back the trophy. That's where it stood, where that mark is there. And from then on, that's answering your question in a long way, all of the good Negro ball players could get work in Puerto Rico and Cuba. They both have always been very baseball conscious.
Right, sure.
So from then on, a boy that we'd be giving $500 a month could go down there and get $1,000. And they all started going to Puerto Rico and Cuba in the wintertime. So the good ones had no problems at all getting work in those two countries.
Interestingly enough, when the topic of Jackie Robinson comes up, Manley talks about a player named Monte Irvin. He was the one that the Negro League owners thought would be the one to make the transition into the major leagues. Monte Irvin was an outfielder with the Newark Eagles.
The owners of the Negro team has been asked who to break down the prejudice of the majors. Monte, we had gotten together and talked about it. Nothing legal or
but what year was this?
Official, but we had discussed it among ourselves. We saw the handwriting on the wall, we knew that it was going to come. And we had decided that if they asked us who to break down the prejudice of the majors, Monte would have been the boy. He had everything. He had now one of the things that Robinson didn't have, which of course I'm not knocking Robinson because he did a magnificent job fitting into the picture like he did. but he didn't have an arm. Monte had one of the most magnificent arms that's ever been in baseball. If he was playing in the outfield, it was a line drive, came right into the catcher's mitt, and nobody ever took an extra base on it. That was out of the question. So he was the one we owners had agreed.
But what year was this that you were talking in terms?
Well, the actual integration took place in '46, didn't it? So this must have been around '44 that we were doing all this.
That's when
talking.
Irvin was in the service.
Yeah.
Prior to bringing Jackie Robinson to the Dodgers in 1945, Branch Rickey set something up called the United States Baseball League, an attempt to create a new league for African-American players. As you can imagine, the existing league owners weren't thrilled, and Effa Manley spoke her mind.
That I received a phone call in my office from Branch Rickey's secretary asking me would I attend a meeting at the Dodgers. Mr. Rickey wanted me to come to a meeting this day. And I told you they were lovely to us the first year we played in the park, and there was no reason why I wouldn't. So I proceeded to go to the meeting, and I was the only owner of a Negro team that had been invited. All the newspapers, black and white, were there. There must have been, 30, 40, I don't know how many, but I was the only owner of a Negro team. And Mr. Rickey took his seat at his desk and proceeded to read from his paper that he was establishing a Negro Baseball League, the United States League. And he read at length all the details and information. When he was finished, he asked for questions. So when it came my time, I spoke and I said to him, well, Mr. Rickey, if you were this interested in Negro baseball, why in the world didn't you contact our two leagues that have been operating so many years? Good question, Mrs. Manley. I'm glad you asked it. Attorney Shackelford, will you answer Mrs. Manley?
Manley was told that they had written to the league presidents and had received no response, so they were just going to proceed.
So as soon as I returned home, I got on the phone and started calling all the owners of the Negro teams and told them what had happened and what was their reaction. So the reaction of all of the owners was, Rickey couldn't take our parks from us. Where would he play? So Mr. Rickey, that was true. The owners were right about that. He couldn't take our park. So his United States League didn't last any time at all. But that was when he decided he'd just take the ball players.
So in 1946, Branch Rickey approached Jackie Robinson about integrating Major League Baseball. Throughout the interview, Manley is subtly outspoken about the fact that Major League Baseball's integration led to the demise of the Negro Leagues. And on more than one occasion in the interview, she refers to the fact that they saw this coming. They weren't surprised. So they were on the verge of losing their business, yet it still seemed that she was happy for the players and happy for what this represented. She was quite outspoken about one major issue about how this whole thing transpired. The Negro League teams were not being compensated for the players that were being taken away from them. So on one hand, Major League Baseball was integrating. On the other hand, the Negro League teams were losing their best players.
Did this Jackie Robinson signing have any impact on you?
Well, I said I think that's probably one thing that caused me not to really be too concerned, because this white and black thing had always been kind of part of my life, Now, I don't think it affected me too much one way or the other. Of course, I didn't like our business being wrecked. That was a very unpleasant thing. And I definitely didn't feel Rickey was right to take those men. I felt that he should have given us something for them. I still feel they could have handled things differently. Now, of course, in Rickey's case, when he set up his United States League, he was planning to become seriously involved with the Negro baseball, and it might have been a better setup than ours. I don't know. He might have, due to his savvy and know-how and, experience and all, he might have set up a better organization than we had, and I don't know, might have been able to help out with the Negro baseball, but I still have always felt that taking those three ball players, $1 million worth of property, and not even saying thank you for it, was very wrong.
When the Cleveland Indians owner and president, Bill Veeck, recruited Newark Eagles player Larry Dobby in 1947 to be the first African-American to play in the American League, Veeck paid the Manleys $15,000. But in 1979, Bill Marshall interviewed Larry Dobby, and the topic turned to the Manleys.
When I first joined the Eagles, he was like, they both were like mother and father, because they took good care of me. My mother told them that that's what she wanted if I wanted to play and if they wanted me to play. They were good business people. She was probably, in my estimation, one of the best knowledgeable ladies that I've ever had the opportunity to meet from a baseball standpoint. She was a good business lady. Had the gift of gab that you need, the personality, the diplomacy, the whole works, and which mold into a business type thing.
My conversation with Bill Veeck the day he called and said he wanted Dobby. The last thing I said to him, after he said if he kept him 30 days, he'd send us another $5,000. I said, well, now, Mr. Veeck, there's one more thing I want to take up with you. Please promise me you'll never give Larry less than $5,000 a year. I said, we're paying him about $4,000, and I didn't want to think that he was going to get any less. He says, well, I'll promise you. And he did. And that's why he put him right on Cleveland. He never spent one day in the minor league. And none of those boys, except Newcomb, he needed minor league training. But the rest of those men were all ready to step right in the majors. And Dobby went right in on the Cleveland team and started right in playing very good baseball.
Very quickly into this interview, you get the sense how much Effa Manley enjoyed the game of baseball, but more so how much she cared for the players. It's a complicated interview. On one hand, celebrating the desegregation of Major League Baseball. On the other hand, mourning the end of the Negro League, a league that she and her husband had worked so hard to build.
I thought that all those that I talked to or was around were very excited about the Negroes breaking into the majors, which I myself was in a way, except that it did wreck our business, and I do feel it was an unfair approach. I feel that it should have been handled much differently.
Following integration, Abe Manley was more inclined than his wife to hang on to the business.
Well, common sense, just I could see how things were going. And of course, I didn't have the gambling background or even the instincts that Abe had, so of course we just didn't see eye to eye on that. He was a definite gambler, and that's the way he had made his money, and he was just willing to gamble a little more. And I guess he felt maybe that the fever would die down. Maybe the Negroes would come back to their own, which I feel that it was not too smart a reaction on the part of the Negro fans to desert us completely. But on the other hand, I could understand it. So I had very little conversation with Abe about it, but I did try hard to get him to quit that next year because we dropped another $20,000. And that's not to be sneezed at, and in those days, money was very different from what it is today. But he wouldn't quit that first year, but the second year he agreed to throw in the towel.
The story of Jackie Robinson, Monte Irvin, Don Newcomb, Larry Dobby, breaking down the color barrier of professional baseball is an incredible story. But before they broke the color barrier, Effa Manley had broken down major barriers of her own.
This was happening during the time when women weren't involved in this sort of, and in fact, up till today, there's no woman actually running a baseball team. I imagine there are many of them employed in different categories, but they're not actually doing the kind of work I did with the team.
If they are, they're behind the scenes.
Yeah. So.
Thanks for listening. The Wisdom Project podcast is brought to you by the Louis B. Nunn Center for Oral History in the University of Kentucky Libraries, and is hosted and produced by Doug Boyd and Kopana Terry. The music is written by Doug Boyd. The full interviews used in this interview are available in the archive at KentuckyOralHistory.org. The incredible voice introducing our podcast is the voice of Stacey Yelton. There just aren't many voices like that. Assistant producer on this episode was Charlotte Boyd. Each of the interviews used in this podcast can be listened to and searched online using our super cool system called OHMS, OHMS. And since baseball season just kicked off the week I originally recorded this, I recommend you listen to these interviews. They're pretty amazing. You can listen to more episodes of The Wisdom Project at thewisdomproject.life. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or on your favorite podcasting platform. If you like the podcast, give us a good review. Like the Nunn Center on Facebook or check out our blog at nuncenter.org. Follow Kopana and I on Twitter at Douglas A. Boyd and at The Real Kopana. And stay tuned for the next episode of The Wisdom Project.